What's up guys, Manny from Motomillion, and let's dig deep into this M1000RR. We're going to really dig deep into the bike. We're going to remove most of the stuff you see on top over here because we're getting the bike ready for our brand tuning flash. That means that we're going to put our velocity stacks and all the other supporting mods like the flapper delete, IAT relocation. We're also going to change our air intake, this beautiful piece that I have right here. It goes right over here. The stock intake is plastic on this bike. And while we're going to take apart the front end of the bike to do the IAT relocation, the flapper removal, I'm going to take that as a chance that we could put this beautiful carbon piece, and you'll see this is going to be all carbon, and we're going to drill into this to put our IAT relocation kit or the IAT sensor on there. But I think enough talking, let's get working. Let's start taking everything apart and doing our supporting mods for our brand tuning flash. So you guys are going to witness this bike being torn down quite a bit. And brand tuning has really good instructional videos on how to do this. Obviously, our videos are not instructional videos on how to do stuff. It might be a little intimidating to do stuff like this. It's not hard, it's just very time consuming, but let's get to it. Let's get this thing deconstructed, and soon this bike will be back on a dyno. The surprise so far is how heavy this piece feels, but just because it's not all carbon, guys. It's a little bit of carbon, a little bit of plastic. We might switch these to the carbon pieces once we get our hands on the stickers here. I think it might look cool because the bike will be on carbon, and between black and the carbon pieces there's not much of a different accent, so I don't think it's going to look off on this bike, because I know some of you guys really like to keep this plastic piece here because some of the bikes are white in terms of the S1000RRs. But in the case of an M1000RR, I think it might be worth to switch it just to have the added weight benefits. But yeah, this feels pretty heavy. And you guys have seen me do this before. Before I take stuff off that I'm not so familiar with, I'll take some pictures. Even if I'm familiar with it, just for the routing of the cables. This information is always in the service manuals, but sometimes it saves a little time to snap a quick picture just to see the routing when we're taking the bike apart so much, just so that when we're putting it together we can save a little time. But also the most important thing is that everything goes back as it should, because the routing is pretty important so that you don't pinch stuff when you're putting it back. That's our airbox out, guys. We're going to be putting our velocity stack, so we got to still open up this airbox. We're going to change our air filter, and also I think if I have the patience, I'm going to use our gold tape to gold tape at least the bottom of this airbox. That way we don't get the heat soak. As you guys saw in the dyno video, this bike runs super hot and it becomes a handicap for it, especially even if you're riding on the street, because if you're on traffic and everything, that heat soak's really going to get to the bike. So as you guys saw, that wasn't too hard or too much work. But now we got to our intake, and right here, these are flappers that is in here. It's actually actuated by your ECU. It opens it or closes it for whatever, I think it's mainly for sound reasons, but it's obviously restrictive in this airway. And what you could do is, if you don't want to go this deep and remove them, brand tuning offers a flapper control flash where these stay open. But in our case, since we're going to do the delete, we're going to remove this intake funnel piece, and we're going to block these holes and get rid of these restrictions that are in the airway. These are the flappers that are in here. I don't know if I could actuate them when it's closed because it is on a servo motor, but we're going to remove all of this with our flapper removal kit. So let's put this on the bench and start taking this apart. Now that the motor is out, I could show you guys the actuation of these. You see these things open up like this, and then it goes shut because there's actually a spring in there. And now you're going to see, once I remove these, we're going to use the plugs that are provided by the intake flapper removal kit, and we're going to plug those holes so it's all nice and flush. and then we'll move on to the next step. Guys, when you're installing this, you want to make sure that the machine piece sits completely flush to here. I don't know if you could see it, but probably this way is better to see it. Look, take a look at this. The machine parts are almost flush, maybe like 0.5 millimeter off, but what you're trying to achieve is you're trying to get the smoothest surface possible in your intake, because if you leave bigger gaps, it leaves turbulence. And yes, it does matter when you're talking about optimizing the power, especially if you're doing mods like this of removing the flappers. You're trying to optimize the power of the bike, so every little bit counts. And if you are not worried too much about it, just get the software so that it just opens the flapper valves for you, and don't even bother with deleting your flapper valves. And now I'm just going to plug the rest of the holes that are left behind with the kit that they gave. These things are pretty tight, and you want them to be tight because that way they're not going to come off. And that's it, guys. That's the flapper removal kit installed. It not only clears up the airway to your bike to optimize the airflow, but it also saves a little bit of weight. And let's see how much weight are we saving with the removal of this thing, because I know some guys are after the ultimate weight loss program for their bikes, and it's saving 7.6 ounces, guys. So there you go, that's the number. And now it's time for the IAT relocation kit, guys. So all these parts that we're showing you, they're optional as a part of the Flash. You don't have to get it either for stage 1 or stage 2. But what this does is it takes the IAT sensor, which is inside this air box. It is sitting in here, and IAT stands for intake air temperature sensor. So instead of measuring inside of the air box, we're gonna move it to as far forward to the nose of the bike so that it's measuring the correct ambient air temperature, and the tune is built for that. So once we flash it, it's gonna have the relevant information that it needs. Guys, the IAT relocation kit is somewhat on here. It's kind of routed through here. Our plug is on this side now. Now it's time for me to start taking the front end of this bike apart. I actually haven't done this before on an M1000 yet. If you noticed, the fairings are a little bit different in the front end, but let's get it taken apart. Let's install that IAT relocation kit. It's an infamous front end of the M1000RR. This iconic shape, it's going to be an iconic shape of the new 2020 M1000RR. And as you see right here, we have our air intake. And now we're ready to replace it with the carbon one. Before I replace it, I'm going to drill the hole that we need for the IAT sensor, and then we'll put everything back together on the bike. So what I did first was to install the carbon intake in place, and I grabbed my marker and I made a little mark in here. As you see, that's where I'm going to drill for the IAT relocation kit, and the IAT sensor is going to go into here. Obviously, before I did this, I had this in place just like this as it sits, and I made sure that my IAT cable was long enough to fit over here. And as brand tuning instructions, they say to put the IAT as forward as possible. I think that's as forward as that I could find a flat surface on here for that IAT sensor to sit. Now I'm going to remove it, do some drilling, put it all back together. Our hole for our IAT sensor, that's going to go right in here, just like this. The only thing is, this is carbon and what we took off is plastic. I assume that on the plastic one, this might be a little more secure because there's more thickness to it. I'm going to use some of our engineering glue that we have here to glue it onto this carbon piece so that this doesn't just flap around. And if you're wondering what engineering glue is, I'll show you on the factory pieces right here. All of these tabs and everything that you see in place, these are all glued on here by engineering glue. We call it engineering glue because it has some bonding characteristics that it bonds to carbon versus plastic, etc. There's specifications to it. This is what we use for carbon. It's right here. And for those who are interested, this is called Acryloc SA10-05, and it comes in various colors, and this is black. So this thing is really handy because this engineering glue is an epoxy, meaning that it's 2 parts. And this tube right here, or this piece right here, mixes it evenly. What I'm going to do is I want to just squirt out some first on a piece of cardboard here, just to make sure that I have it mixed well. And then I'm going to carefully apply it around this piece here. Luckily, this doesn't have a long cure time, but I'll still leave it for 5-10 minutes and then we'll be ready to put this back on. And I want to mention, you guys are lucky this is not smell-o-vision because this thing smells pretty nasty. But here's our IAT sensor right in the center, as center as I could get it. While our IAT sensor is bonding onto our intake, I'm going to take my time because I see our steering damper right here. Otherwise, I have to remove most of the stuff to get access to it. So I'm going to install our all-in steering damper on the bike. That's once and for all, it's out of the way. I hope we don't ever have to pull off the front end of the bike. So the all-ins kit is pretty self-explanatory. It is a manually adjusted steering damper. And it has a certain amount of clicks that you do it. We run this because it gives you more feel in the front end when you're riding. And if the front end ever comes off the ground when you're coming off a corner on the track, if you ever put it down, sometimes you get that infamous shake. This is what helps get rid of that. That's what it does. It dampens that shake that you get. And as I mentioned, it's a direct bolt-on. We have full access to it. Let's get it on there. It's pretty simple. This actually doesn't have an electronic damper. It has a manual damper and the adjustments on the side. It's just that the adjustment range is not high enough for some of the track riders and for some people who prefer to have them at a stiffer setting on the road. Here's our carbon air tube, and I'm going to place it in. Fits just like factory. I'm going to plug my IAT in, just like this. Now I'm ready to start putting the OEM bodywork back on. Now that our intake is on, I'm going to put our front fairing back on the bike, if this is called the front fairing at this point. And it fits right in. And the bolt locations are here. Just going to tighten up the bolts. The front is on, guys. You can see me smiling because I'm all in for these subtle touches of the bikes. Our intake is now carbon. Our IAT is on there. And when you take a look, it's a nice clean carbon piece that's in there. No one's going to notice this other than me or someone who really knows the bike. And I think it's not such a big drastic change and not an expensive part. I think the bike could have came from the factory like this. It didn't, but we fixed it. Now we have our IAT there. Now let's move on to the airbox. The IAT relocation kit comes with this plug, and all you do is you plug it in. I want to do it nice and centered. It doesn't really matter, but it does matter for me. And you want to firmly press it in. Perfect. Now that hole is plugged. And I'm going to flip it around. I'm going to remove our air filter from here. And it's going to give us access to the velocity stacks that are in here. And these are rubber pieces. We're going to remove these. And then we're going to install our brand tuning velocity stacks on there. The stacks are installed. It's a shame you don't get to see this part of the bike when it's all together because these stacks are really pretty. And I know for a fact that it's going to help us with our horsepower numbers on the dyno. And next, I'm going to apply this gold tape onto this airbox because this, as I said, it's gold tape, it's heat reflective tape, and it reflects the heat away from the engine of the bike so that we don't get heat soak or as much heat soak as it was without it. We've shown it before on our R1M series that it actually helps because we checked the two bikes we had on the dyno. One had the heat reflective tape, one didn't, and we saw the IATs will be a little higher without that heat reflective tape. Also, before I put this back on the bike, we're going to change our air filter. This is our stock filter. We're going to run the P08 F185 in this bike, the race filter, but both the P08 and the race option. The P08 F185 is a great option for this bike, but we're after those horsepower numbers to show you guys what we can achieve with this M1000RR. So we're opting in for the race filter. I'm not going to bore you guys to death showing how to apply this gold tape onto this airbox because it's a very tedious process, guys. I'm going to do it off camera. I'm going to put the bike back together to get it flashed. And I think that's it for this episode, guys. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. Until next time, guys, have a good one.